So, good afternoon, teach and everyone, especially to you, Miss Cecilia. Good afternoon. For this afternoon, we are going to talk about structuralism and post-structuralism. But before we start, we have of our group. We apologize and ask permission to bear with us, and sorry if we encounter the technical errors. So let's start. Miss Cañedo will present and discuss first.
Afternoon, everyone. So for today's is we will going to tackle the structuralism and post-structuralism. And I will be the one to discuss first, and I hope you've listened attentively. Structuralism enjoyed popularity in the 1950s and 1960s in both European and American literature theory and criticism. So, structuralism focuses on literature as a system of a sign in which meaning is constructed within a context. And also, cultural communities determine that the meanings and relationship of sign. And criticism that uses a structuralism approach analysis patterns, narrative operation, and or codes of operation to interpret the text and culture from which it emerged, exploring underlying structures that makes the creation of meaning possible. Structuralism is a mode of knowledge of nature and human life that is interested in relationship rather than individual object, or alternatively where objects are defined by the set of relationship of which they are part and not by the qualities possessed by taken in isolation. Here is structuralism is the intellectual movement and philosophical orientation often associated initially with the Western discourses of Levi-Strauss, which also Marx and Althusser, for example, who claim to analyze and explain invariant structures and in constitutive of nature, society, and the human psyche. So, in other words, is structuralism criticism is a research method of type of textual research that literary critics use to interpret text, or a genre of discourse employed by literary critics use to share the result of their interpretive effort. So, for example, here is like here is like pabasahon ka ng mga literary works, and then you are going to analyze, you are going to critique ug unsay gigamit nila nga theory, unsay gigamit nila nga mga structures nga kanang mga literary device nga gigamit, like mga metaphor, simile, personification, ingon ana siya mo na kanang structuralism criticism. Kanang kuan siya kanang murag naa siya pagka systematic ang style sa text. Yes.
The Encyclopedia of Writers, Researchers, and Knowledge Worker Writing Common Research and Research Method Textual, Research Methods Literary Criticism, Structuralist Criticism, Structuralist Criticism written by Angela Edward Mahon, and Structuralist Criticism in a Research Method, a type of textual research that literary critics use to interpret text, a genre of discourse employed by literary critics use to share the result of the interpretative efforts, K-terms, dialect, hermeneutics, semiotics, and text and intertextuality tone. So, K-terms definition sign the basic unit of Sasarian linguistic, a physical entity consisting of signifier and acoustic image.
so when you say K-terms, is that it is a basic unit of Sasarian linguistic. In other words, is an acoustic image and also signify a concept. And a sign is said to be the arbitrary because a logical relationship between the signifier and signified does not necessarily exist. Referent the extra linguistic object to which a sign refers between the sign and the referent are also arbitrary and conventional binary opposition, a pair of related terms or concepts that appear to be opposite in the meaning. So example here is like light. So what is the opposite meaning of light? So dark. Like for example, white, black. And also structuralism focuses on literary as a system of cultural communities determine the meanings and relationship of sign, and criticism that uses a structuralist approach analyzes patterns, narrative operation, and or codes of operation to interpret the text and the culture from which it emerged, exploring an underlying structure that make the creation of meaning possible. I guess it's already mentioned na kaganina na katong like for example magbasa ka og mga literary works, like for example novel, poem, and then I guess we already did katong naghimo ta og literary criticism ni Ma'am Cecilia, which is katong gipabuhatan niya mga hypnosis, like the auto background of the writer. So and then the background of the background of the culture or the author. So next.
So good afternoon, everyone. So let me read it first, then I explain it to you later, okay? So listen. The popular structuralistic critic Terence Hawkes defines structuralism as a way of thinking about the words which is predominantly concerned with the description of structures. Structuralism focuses on literature as a system of sign in which meaning is constructed with a context. Words inscribed with meaning may be compared to other words and structures to determine their meaning. Unlike formalistic critics, new critics, structural critics are primarily interested in the code, signs, and rules that govern social and cultural practices, including communication. So structuralism, in a simple term, it is a method of interpreting and analyzing such things as language, literature, and society, which focuses on constructing ideas or elements of structure and attempts to show how they relate to the whole structure. However, in Terence Hawkes defines structuralism as a way of thinking about the world, which is predominantly concerned with the description of structures, unlike formalist critics or new critics. Structuralist critics, they're all interested in code, sign, and rule as well. They govern social and cultural practices, including communication, but in structuralism, it is interested in literature. We all know literature sometimes written and sometimes spoken. So, spoken material. So, structuralism focuses on literature as a system sign, which means it is constructive within a context. What is the difference between structuralism and post-structuralism? So as structuralism was a literacy movement primarily concerned with understanding how language works as a system of meaning production. And while post-structuralism, on the other hand, is less singularly defined as a movement than structuralism. So structuralism and post-structuralism have been widely influential within cultural studies because both schools of thought focus on how meaning is made, and making is an essential function of culture. Structuralism is a theoretical approach that identifies pattern in social arrangement, mostly notable language. On the other hand, post-structuralism builds on the insight of structuralism. It holds all meaning to be fluid rather than universal and predictable. But both structuralism and post-structuralism are important theoretical influence in cultural studies and have been able to explore cultural as a set of signifying practices. So, structuralism is a mode of knowledge of nature and human life that is interested in relationship rather than individual object, or alternatively where objects are defined by the set of relationship of which they are part and not by the equalities possessed by them taken in solution. So the main concept of structuralism it is mode of knowledge of nature and human life that is interested in relationship rather than individuals object or alternatively where objects are defined by the set of relationship of which they are part and not by the qualities possessed by them taken in isolation. So the main goal of structuralism to provide researcher with a kind of universal tool and approach that can be used in many scientific fields and in many domains of life. So Jacques Derrida and Roland Barthes researched the use structuralist principles in different scientific fields, but particularly in literature. So structuralism is a tendency that seeks to understand and explain social reality in terms of social structures. So structures are defined as a pattern of form, social relation, and combination among the set of constitute social elements of component parts part of such as position units, levels, regions, location, and social information. Structuralism in a brief statement is not less than challenge. It is only hard to define, but also takes multiple forms of common denominator as evidence. The structure which many structuralists use have acquired diverse significations. Fortunately, upon comparing and analyzing various meaning of this discipline to define structuralism, this synthesis seems possible and feasible to understand. The approach has long been examined for its underlying approach principle and to achieve ideal intelligibility in all the domains. However, structuralism and its underlying principles entail a dynamic dichotomy in different ways. I mean domains. Okay, so structuralism in the theory in the philosophy of mathematics that holds that mathematical theories describe structure of mathematical objects. So mathematical objects are exhaustively defined by their place in such structures. Consequently, structuralism maintains that mathematical objects do not possess any instinctive properties but are defined by their external relationship in the system. So for instance, the structuralism holds that the number 1 is exhaustively defined by being the successor of 0. In the structure of the theory of natural numbers, by generation of this example, any natural number is defined by its perfect place in the structure of the number line. So other example of mathematical object might include line and place and geometry or elements and operation in abstract algebra.
Good afternoon, everyone. Okay, my topic is for the linguistic and the 19th century structuralism emerged as a way out to study linguistics and its components ironically as isolated items. The idea prevailed throughout the 19th century. Later, it turned to a perspective that aims to investigate it as in synchronously functioning language system. Well, we talk about linguistics is a general theory of culture of methodology that implies that elements of human culture and, and be understood by way of their relationship to be a broader system. It works to uncover the structure that underlie all the things that humans do, think, perceive, and feel. Next, is moreover for psychologists, structuralism is known for combating atomistic tendency that reduce a whole system to inferior elements. Similarly, to the domain of philosophy finds structuralism a way to tackle functionalism and historicism, especially the theories associated with human subject. Well, to talk about structuralism is an intellectual tendency that seeks to understand and explain social reality. Social reality in terms of social structure are defined as a pattern and form of social relationship and combination among of social elements as components parts such as position, units, level, region, and location, and social formation. Firstly is the content intrinsic intelligibility that emphasizes all the structure in any domain are self-sufficient to learn and grasp them, there is no need for any reference generated by extraneous elements. Secondly, it is essential to understand and believe that someone has made specific structure which are conspicuous in historical employment despite the diversity of structure. All of the all of them have some common and necessary properties. Well, in the social science that structuralism made of inquiry so ought not simply to identify structured or relationship force or rather than to look behind and beneath the visual and conceptual design. We'll talk about belief, ideas, behavior. And next is history and transformation of structuralism critical theory. First image after WW2. Well, in other words, is one, two. The theory is comprised of multiple disciplines such as psych- psychoanalytical criticism, postcolonialism, linguistic structuralism, and literary criticism. The theory received a great deal of retaliation and treatment of liberal consensus, claiming that criticism will from the 1930s to 1950s, the structuralism among all these overarching discourse has been the most controversial. In 1950, this movement intention in France and has a long-lasting impact in literature and English students until the late 1980s. The main in France and had its long-lasting impact into literature and English studies until the late 1980s. The main concern of his movement were philosophy and language rather than the author and history. While 1930 and 1950 is the structure made of reasoning has since been applied in the range of fields including anthropology, soci- sociology, psychology, literary criticism, and economics. By the late of 1950s, is the memory of structuralism basics since come under attack by a new wave of the French intellectual philosophers such as Historial Michael and Jacques Derrida. Well, Jacques Derrida is a French of philosopher best known for developing a form of semiotic analysis known as distraction, which is analyzing a numerous texts and development in the context. Then Ronald Barthes French is a is a friend of literary theorist and philosopher, critic, and and semiotics through the analysis of variety of science systems mainly derived from Western popular culture.
So, my assigned topic is to talk about the authors or the structuralists during this time. So, first, structuralism relies upon the fundamental belief, which, according to it, human activities are not natural but conceited. The effects of this belief pervade all famous structuralist works. Some of the significant practitioners, like Robert Scholes, Robert Scholes was an American literary critic and theorist. He is known for his ideas of fabulation and metafiction. Robert Scholes, born on May 19, 1929, and he died December 9, 2016. Fabulation of Robert Scholes described the large and growing class of mostly 20th century novels that are in a style similar or magical realism and do not fit into traditional categories of realism or novelist. So in this time, Robert Scholes introduced the novel of fabulation. Next, Terence Hawkes is Emeritus Professor of at Books, English at Cardiff University. He is the author of numbers of books on literary theory and of six Shakespeare's. including Structuralism and Semiotics 1977. That's Experience Rug 1986 and Meaning by Section 1992. And structuralism and semiotics provides ways of studying human cognition and communication. So, Terence Hawkes believes that, he also kanang tabang ni Shakespeare that believes that ang structuralism and semiotics is kanang need to combine in order to make a literary theory. Then another one structuralist is David Lodge. Lodge is an American voice actor who works for anime as well as animation and the video game community, and it is known for his voice work in the Power Rangers. Next, Colin Cave is an English academic writer and film producer. He is currently a distinguished professor of English and film at the University of Pittsburgh. Colin McCabe, born in February 9, 1949, and he is 72 years old for now. Next slide, please. The reason why structuralism bloomed in 19th century is its attempt to decrease the complexities of individual experience to some underlying structures. Most of these human experiences are universal and had its roots of Aristotle's classicism beliefs. Classicism beliefs means Aristotle classicism. It is the combination of Aristotelian and classicism. Classicism, it is the arts, refers generally to a high regard for classical period. So, we believe man also nga si Aristotle sa una nga daghan man kani siya na-contribute sa ato as pagkakaroon sa literary. So, also, gi-combine ni siya para we can come up a good literary communication also. Then, structuralists in this regard, define structure as a conceptual system with three main properties that includes wholeness. First is the wholeness refers to the holistic function of a system. Transportation refers to the evolution of a system that, as it must not be static. Self-regulation refers to the constancy of the basic structure. So we believe that when we are making a literary analysis, we need to follow conceptual or tried to make a good kanang literary analysis. Next, please. Experience and patterns of structuralism really important because there is no denying that structuralism completely changed the perspective of analyzing literary work. So if we don't have, or if we cannot experience, or if we will not follow the pattern of the structuralism, we cannot make a good literary work. As of ibalik na to atong gibuhat sa mga literary before ni Ma'am Cecilia, di ba, gilisdan man kita kung wala pa man ni siya na-introduce before. Then, a structuralist also is very important. Ngay, mao man ni sila ang mopuno o kanang idea nato to make a good work and presented language as a dynamic entity that plays a vital role in constituting meanings in the context. Many of them asserted that language has specific patterns which incorporate various elements common to human experience. So when we are making literary work manday or analysis, we need to assess or we need to follow the specific patterns, like making a poem. If we're not following the 4 stanzas, 7 like that, we cannot make it a good sakto ba ni siya. We cannot consider it is unsa ni siya nga poem, as in siya nga genre if we will not know that one. So next, please. We're going also to talk about the relationship of literary theory of structuralism. So structuralism dramatically influences literature and the way critics used to perceive and criticize the literary text. Literary theory employs a structuralist approach to examine the underlying principle of text composition. analyzing the principle of plot progression or how author plays or presented the characters. It is also structuralist activity. So also when we are going to make a literary theory, we need to consider the structuralism or the realism or whatsoever theory. Historical criticism or modes theory. Thematic, tragic and comic. Artism or myths theory. Tragedy, comedy, satire and romance. Ethical criticism or symbols theory. Mythical, anagogic, literal, descriptive, and formal. Theoretical criticism or genre theory, epos, drama, lyric. Sword is one of the well-known figures who introduced semiotics into structuralism. Another theorist, Charles Sanders, presented semiotic theory to expand the horizon of structuralism. So, as what Ruby said and the other reporters said that post structuralism is a term for philosophical and literary forms of theory that both build upon the reject ideas established by structuralism. So post structuralism, guys, is the continuation of structuralism, that intellectual project that precedes it. Structuralism proposed that human culture can be understood by means of a structure that is molded on a language. Next, please. Post-structuralism emerged in France during the 1960s as a movement critiquing structuralism. According to J.G. Mercure, a love-hate relationship with structuralism developed among many leading French thinkers in the 1960s. Wa pa man tawag anak ano. The students and workers against the state in May 1968. Next, please. Barthes and the need for meta language. Meta language first is a form of language or set of terms used for the description or analysis of another language. In Elements of Simology, 1967, Barthes advances the concept of the meta language, a systematized way of a concept like meaning and grammar beyond the constraint of a traditional first order language in a meta language. Symbol replace words and phrase. So when you are going to make a literary work or analysis, you should be consider the grammar or the language or what symbol that you need to put on your analytical in order to kanang mahatag bitaw nimo ang imong buot pasabot into your reader. Next, please. Derrida's lecture of John Hopkins, the occasional designation of post-structuralism as a movement can be tied to the fact that mounting criticism of as a movement that became evident of approximately the same time that structuralism became a topic of interest in the universe in the United States. This interest led to the colloquium of Johns Hopkins University in 1966 titled The Language of Criticism and the Sciences of Man, to which such French philosophers of Jacques Derrida, Roland Barthes, and Jacques Lacan were invited to speak. So, just put in mind when we are going to make a literary analysis or literary work, we should first consider the literary theory what we have like this. You need to consider all the symbols, phrases, or words grammar so that you can make your good literary analysis. So thank you so much for listening our report. Hope you will understand and you will learn something about our discussion for this afternoon.